Hi, welcome to the CIPS webinar. We'll be getting underway shortly. We'll just wait for a few more who are yet to join. Hello, welcome to the CIPS webinar. Really pleased to be here. My name is Charlotte Payne. I head up the professional body for CIPS and I'm speaking to you today from Melbourne. We've got a few more people who are just joining the session for today. Before I actually get underway, I'd very much like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we all meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. And for our New Zealand guests, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, katoa. Before we get underway, I'll just run you through our housekeeping or Zoom keeping since we're in this virtual forum today. Firstly, please be aware that the session is going to be recorded today and we will provide you with a recording afterwards. We have some colleagues today that are mingling amongst the virtual audience, so please interact with them using your chat function that you should have on your Zoom interface. Give us a shout out, let us know who you are, where you're from. You also have a Q&A function in your Zoom interface, so we'll be taking your questions at the end in a Q&A session with myself and our panel experts who will be talking to you partway through today's session. So please submit your questions using that Q&A. If you see a question that you want to be answered, do like it so that we can see which questions are the most popular. So hopefully you're all sitting comfortably. You've treated yourself to a home coffee or tea. Let's get underway. So we're running this session very much into demand from senior experienced professionals, those operating in strategic roles in procurement and supply. And we're delighted to be able to host this session for you to allow you to find out a little bit more about Msips and how that can support your career. So on the agenda for today, we're going to talk a little bit about how Msips can support career advancement. We're going to unpack Msips. What is it? How do Msips drive greater performance in the workplace? We're then going to move through to understanding how you can leverage your experience, your knowledge, your expertise to actually achieve Msips through our experiential pathway. And we have two panel experts joining that session, and they'll tell you a little bit about their experience and how Msips has supported their career. And then, as promised at the end, we'll have that panel Q&A, so please do use that Q&A function to submit your questions. Before we get underway, I'd quite like to understand a little bit more about our audience today, so I'm going to move through to the first poll. If you could please use the poll to let us know a little bit more about your role. Are you a CIPS member? Have you perhaps joined in the last 12 months? Are you a bit more long-standing? Have you joined more than 12 months ago? Or are you not a CIPS member? I'll just let those results load and then we can take a look. Okay, so you can see with those poll results that should be showing on your screen now, we've got quite a mixed audience. So we've got a number of fairly recent members, some more long-standing members, so that's really the majority, but equally we've got around 40% who are perhaps interested in finding out a little bit more about CIPS. So welcome to all of you, very warm welcome. And again, please don't forget to submit your questions using the Q&A. So let's move to the first session and really find out a little bit more about how Msips will support your career advancement. So I've been speaking to quite a lot of procurement professionals recently. They're actually kind of talking about things hotting up in that recruitment space in procurement and supply. Certainly the procurement and supply profession recruitment agencies that we're in touch with are saying that they've actually never been so busy. So it seems that there are potentially plenty of moves coming afoot. So again, I'm quite interested in understanding your perspective. Does that resonate with you? So we're just going to draw a second poll question to really understand a little bit more about your plans around your career in the coming 12 months. So are you perhaps looking at your career and considering a career move or a role change in the next 12 months? If you could just let us know your answers on the poll, which should have appeared on your screens. Okay, let's see what the scores on the doors are. Okay, so that's really interesting. A massive 50% of you are considering a role change in the next 12 months. A number of you, perhaps 30%, it doesn't appear to be on the table, but I guess you never know. And there's around 20% of you that are undecided. So perhaps if an opportunity, the right opportunity arises, that's something that you might consider. Thanks for that. That's really helpful. And that certainly does resonate with what we're hearing from the recruitment agents out there with the ears on the ground. So how does Msips support you from a career advancement perspective? Let me just first start to explain that Msips is a professional designation. It's a certification. What it actually does is a process by which an individual proves that they have the knowledge, the experience, the capability to perform a particular job at a given level. In this case, we're referring to procurement and supply management. Our role as the professional body charged with driving standards in procurement and supply and protecting the procurement and supply management profession is very much to ensure that the standards that underpin Msips are consistent, they're not compromised, to ensure that those Msips credentials continue to mean something to stakeholders out there, whether they be your employer, your future employer. Equally, they may be your employees or your suppliers. So achieving those Msips professional credentials or certification very much helps you gain a competitive advantage. And as you'll have just seen, that there are certainly many moves potentially planned in the next 12 months if the right things start to happen. So gaining Msips is really a way to help you differentiate yourselves from others that might well be looking at similar roles to yourself. We also know from the research that we've conducted that those with Msips actually earn potentially more than their non-Msips counterparts in comparable roles. So in the 2019 salary survey, which we conducted with Hayes Recruitment, that differential was actually 21%, where Msips holders earned up to 21% more than their non-Msips counterparts. I'm actually quite lucky. I've had a sneak preview at the 2020 results, which will be coming to you early July. And we can see that that differential has actually increased. It's approaching in the region of 30% for Australia and 22% for New Zealand. So hopefully that's really good news for you guys. We're certainly seeing in Australia and New Zealand from our employer stakeholders a real drive towards professionalisation in procurement and supply within the discipline. So they're really beginning to value the independence that those credentials bring and what they say about those individuals. Globally, there are 22,000 qualified procurement Msips and Fsips professionals that are members of CIPS globally. In the past 3 years, we've seen that professional community grow by about 4%. Comparatively, and be mindful of that real drive towards professionalism that we're seeing, in Australia and New Zealand, the qualified Msips and Fsips pool is approaching around 800. However, in the past 3 years, we've seen that grow by a phenomenal 16%. And that says to us that those Msips credentials are really valued and they're doing what they need to do for the professionals that hold them. And they are hopefully unlocking doors, unlocking potential for them. Above all, holding those credentials awarded through an independent assessment by your professional body, which is charged with doing just that, and also independently regulated to do that, allows you to be trusted as a professional. That certification that you have earned demonstrates your commitment to your career, your commitment to professionalism, and your commitment to ethical practice and upholding the highest standards of procurement and supply management. So let's have a look about what does Msips stand for. Those of you that run procurements, I'm sure you'll be aware that that specification is really a key part. So what's the underpinning specification for Msips? What does that Msips chartered professional really mean? When you break it down, Msips stands for having achieved and attained a high level of competency and skills in procurement and supply. It also has expectations around business experience. Hence, there is that requirement to achieve Msips to demonstrate suitable experience in procurement and supply management. There is also the commitment to ethics. For Msips, indeed, all of our members will sign up to a code of conduct, which very much outlines their commitment to how they will perform in their roles and the behaviours that they will exhibit as procurement professionals. So those three things really underpin the Msips professional designation. When I mentioned attainment of high-level competency, the Msips designation is awarded at honours degree level. It is not a degree, it is not awarded by a university, it is a professional designation, but it is awarded based on individuals evidencing proficiency and competence at honours degree level. It is therefore globally portable, it is transferable between sectors, between countries, between organisations, and it is underpinned by those strong standards that ensure that the Msips certification is valued, it has credence, it ensures that you are seen as a credible and trusted professional. Now, I've introduced there the concept of chartered professional. Those who already hold Msips can actually enhance their professional certification by achieving chartered professional. It is a common notation among your engineers, among your finance people, where people are chartered or certified. What chartered professional stands for is a commitment to ethics, which is renewed every year through completion of the ethical certificate, which has a 12 months duration from award. And it is also a commitment to lifelong learning, or a commitment to remaining current with the business environment. So Msips holders can actually apply to complement their Msips certification to achieve chartered professional through completing the ethical certificate and completing 30 hours of CPD annually to retain their chartered professional designation. That 30 hours, that is 1 hour of learning is equal to 1 CPD hour. So the currency again is very much relevant for today's business environment. It will include your technical skills, but it will also look at soft skills and other aspects that you come across throughout your professional life. I'm going to talk to you now about how you can actually leverage your experience, the level of knowledge that you have attained throughout your career in order to achieve Msips. But before I do that, let's perhaps look at the levels of experience that we have in the virtual room today. And we're going to launch our third poll and ask you how much experience of procurement and supply management do you have? It doesn't have to be consecutive, and just really a rough estimate. How much experience of working in procurement and supply management or supply chain management or related roles do you have? If you could just complete the poll, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So you can see from the scores on the doors there that actually the vast majority of people have over 10 years experience operating in procurement and supply. And I'm sure throughout that extensive experience, you'll actually have seen how procurement and supply in businesses has evolved throughout that period. We've got around a third of our audience with between 5 and 10 years experience, and a fewer with them up to 5 years experience. Thank you, that's really helpful. So let's look at how you can leverage that experience in order to achieve MCIPS, now that you understand a little bit about what that's all around. So to be eligible to apply for MCIPS via our experiential pathway, you need to meet our criteria, which we will assess through a stage 1 desktop application, which I'll come on to shortly. So our management entry pathway is our experiential pathway, and that's where we will assess individuals based on their experience in procurement and supply and the competence that they have developed throughout their careers, which are often very colourful. So experience around 10 years in procurement and supply is essential, and in particular really focusing on operating at that strategic level in procurement and supply. So a strategic level role in procurement and supply, you will be leading parts within your responsibility. You will be also operating to influence stakeholders, whether they're within your organisation or outside your organisation. So that's the kind of level that we're looking at. You'll also be a current CIPS member, and you'll have a valid ethical certificate, which is free as part of your membership. So that's really the eligibility criteria. Moving through, I'm just going to give you an overview of the process, and then we'll unpack the different stages in a little bit more detail. But before I do that, let me just introduce you to the global standard for procurement and supply. I mentioned that earlier. It is a competency framework for the length, the breadth, the depth of the procurement and supply management profession. It really goes through the different competencies, so the knowledge and the things that individuals should be able to do at the different levels of the profession, from entry level right the way up to that very senior strategic leader. It's broken down into different levels of competency, and there is a certain level of competency called professional level of competency. That is the one that is anchored to honours degree level from an academic perspective, and that is the one that defines the basis of the assessment for our experiential pathway to Msips, and indeed any of the other pathways through to Msips. So when we look at the assessment components, they are very much underpinned by the content of the global standard, and I'll explain a little bit about what that means shortly. So in order to go through the experiential pathway, there are a number of stages. The first is the application, and that's where those that are eligible will submit their application. We will assess that to confirm eligibility to commence the programme. You'll then go through to a 2-stage assessment that comprises an online competency assessment, and that's followed up by a competency-based interview with one of our assessors. The conclusion is where we provide you your results and your outcome report. So let's just look at the application and the sorts of things that you might be required to submit, just so that you can get an idea of the length of time it might take you. There are a number of things that you'll need to submit so that we can assess to ensure that you're eligible to be accepted onto the programme. The first is very much information about your career history. So your job roles, it doesn't have to be consecutive, but what we're really interested in is your experience, particularly in the past 10 years, and particularly highlighting and showcasing the scope of your roles in procurement and supply management. We're also really interested in your current role, because that serves as really good context for the later interview. So please also submit your current role or job description together with an organisation chart, just so we can see how that role fits in your organisation. We then get you to submit a testimonial letter from your line manager. There is a template online, so you can just use that, put it on company headed paper and ask your line manager or similar to sign that for you. It's not a character reference, it's very much a testimonial letter, just to validate that the content of your application matches their expectations. So in particular, that current job description matches your current role, and that the org chart matches where your current role fits. We also ask that you have an up-to-date ethical certificate, and actually that's part of the assessment, because you'll have seen from my earlier slide that one of the components of the global standard that we assess is ethics in procurement and supply. So actually having that ethical certificate ready and up to date means you've already completed part of the assessment. So you'll submit that via an online form, and we will provide you with an outcome within 5 working days from application. We submit all of the we review all of the evidence that you have submitted. We conduct that desktop assessment, and we verify whether you are eligible to commence on the management entry pathway towards achieving Msips. So if that route is suitable for you, at that point, the assessment fee for the assessment components of the pathway becomes payable, and you can see the assessment fees there on your screen. Often, organisations consider that these costs form part of their professional development, training and development, learning and development type plans. So certainly worth reflecting on whether that is true in your case. Equally, if MER is not suitable for you, our customer services team are there on hand to support you and will certainly help you identify the alternative options available for you as a learning and development pathway through to achieving Msips. So, all being well, you've been accepted onto the programme, and that really moves through to the assessment stage. And as I said earlier, it's a two-phase assessment. The first is an online competency assessment. That comprises multiple choice questions, and they're very much designed to test your knowledge. And that knowledge assessment is done against the professional level of competence from the global standard. We recommend that you allow around 90 minutes. That assessment is conducted online, as I've said, so make sure that you have access to a computer. We recommend you're in a quiet location where you're not going to be disturbed. So you've got that 90 minutes of uninterrupted time, and you'll work your way through the questions. As I've said, all of those questions are based on the content of the global standard. That's freely available on our website. You'll find it from the home page. So in order to kind of prepare yourself and build up your confidence levels going into that assessment, we recommend that you just flick through the online interactive global standard tool and work your way through the different competencies within the professional level of competence. You don't need to go through the ethical one because you'll already have achieved your ethical certificate, but you'll need to focus on the other 10 areas of competence from the global standard so that you can maybe familiarise yourselves with the terminology. They are multiple choice questions, so you will be asked to provide an answer. Just make sure that you are in a position to complete that test all in one go. You're not able to start it, pause, go away, and then come back. It does need to be completed continuously. Once you've completed your online assessment, you will then be invited to book from the available dates and times your interview with your CIPS assessor. So that's all done through the online booking screen. That interview is conducted with a CIPS trained assessor. So they are truly independent, and you can be reassured that they've gone through our training, our quality assurance procedures to be approved as a CIPS assessor. Again, allow around 90 minutes for that interview. It's conducted via video conference using Zoom technology, not too dissimilar to today's conversation. And I'm sure given the COVID-19 situation and our responses to that, we're all an awful lot more familiar using video conferencing technology than perhaps we were a few months ago. As I've said, all of the questions, both for the competency assessment, which you complete online, but also within the interview, are based on that professional level within the global standard. And again, what I recommend you consider as part of your preparation for that interview is going through the levels of competency from the global standard, picking out the competencies at the professional level, and just make a mental note, or perhaps write some notes of examples where in your career you've actually used that competence, you've done that thing, so that you've got those examples fresh and at the forefront of your mind, so you can really showcase your level of competence to the best of your ability. Again, there are no questions around the ethical theme because you've already done that through achieving the ethical certificate at the outset as part of your eligibility to join the programme. And also there are loads of guidance resources available to support your preparation and help you understand what to expect as part of that interview. They're all available on the website in the membership section in the area around Get Msips. what I would always say to people that, you know, preparation is key. It's well worth the time to go through and just prepare, reflect on your career, reflect on the things that went well, actually reflect on the things that didn't go well and what you learned from them. So that's all fresh as part of your role. The interviewer, as I've said, they are a trained CIPS assessor and they go through regular training and standardization. You won't know the identity of the interviewer at the point of booking, so it's all independent and impartial. But what they'll typically do at the start of the interview is really get you to introduce yourself, give a quick career overview to really warm you up, and then they'll go through the different questions, ultimately to ensure that they assess right the way across the different areas of competency from within the global standard. So it'll be pretty broad and it will look right the way across. So following the interview, we then work with the assessor. They will produce a recommendation and a full performance report based on your assessment. And that recommendation is then signed off and ratified as part of our internal quality assurance processes. There are 3 possible outcomes arising from the assessment. The first is fairly straightforward. You've met the criteria. You've evidenced that through your application and you've evidenced that throughout your assessment. You are therefore eligible for the award of Msips. Equally, it might be that throughout the assessment, there is a small requirement to develop in some areas identified, in which case we would issue you with a development plan, and that development plan is designed for you to complete, to submit the outcome of the development plan for us to assess so that we can then confirm the award of Msips. So that would happen in cases where small gaps are identified. The third and final outcome is no award. Now I should just say that this is an exceptional outcome. The failure rate is very, very low for the management entry pathway through to Msips. That's not to say it's a dead cert, just because you've been accepted onto the program that you're going to get Msips. However, because of the vetting that we do up front with your desk-based application, looking at your career history, your current role, and so on, we are very much ensuring that this pathway, only people who potentially meet the criteria are accepted onto it. So we undertake some of that risk at the outset. You then go through that assessment to showcase and evidence your competencies before we move through to the award. If you're successful and you've been awarded Msips, you're then immediately eligible to apply for Chartered Professional if you have those 30 hours CPD, or you can apply at the point that you do have those 30 continuing professional development hours. Remember, you've already achieved your ethical certificate, so at that point you would gain your Chartered Professional. That would be valid for 12 months until you renew by repeating your ethical certificate and your continuing professional development the following year. So hopefully that's given you a really good overview of how Msips will support you and also how you can leverage your experience to gain Msips. I'm now going to hand over and introduce 2 panel experts that will really reflect on their careers and tell us a little bit more about the role that Msips played throughout their careers. So I'd like to welcome Sarah Collins. Sarah is Head of Procurement at the ABC, and also Tod Cooper. Tod is the Director for Commercial Strategy and Relationships at the New Zealand Defence Force. So firstly, over to Sarah. Sarah, would you mind sharing with our audience a little bit about your background and career history, and also really highlighting the value of Msips and how the role that has played throughout your career? Thanks.
Yeah. So I started my career in supply chain bit over 20 years ago. I studied manufacturing management, and I sort of envisaged I was going to work in the manufacturing area and supply chain. A little bit different now, I work at the ABC, but I sort of firmly believe that procurement is a supply chain discipline. And I was originally doing production scheduling for logistics work, and I got tapped on the shoulder by one of the managers who worked in the buying team thought my skill set would be quite suited for joining them. So I joined just before procurement started being professionalised in Australia, but I was lucky because I worked for a global multinational being Unilever. They were starting to roll out a lot of the professionalism that they had done in areas like the UK. So we transitioned to being a procurement function. I think the first time I ever heard the word procurement was when it appeared on my pay slip and I couldn't even pronounce it. But I very quickly realised it was something I enjoyed doing. I was lucky that I was working in direct procurement. So I was doing a lot of things around sourcing of packaging and ingredients and raw materials. And then at a latter stage, when Unilever started merging a lot of its business divisions, we were able to start looking at a lot of the indirects at a national level. So it was really good to get both the direct and the indirect exposure. When I sort of realised that I wanted to work in procurement as specialised area of supply chain, I then sort of started looking around the industry to see what sort of jobs were there, and deliberately made quite an unusual move because I wanted to test that this thing called procurement that I enjoyed was transferable. So I went from manufacturing to an investment bank, which a lot of people thought was a bit of a strange transfer, but you know, it was very similar. I was managing very similar indirects there to what I'd been managing at Unilever, and a lot of the principles were the same. From an investment bank, I went to higher education and I worked at the University of Sydney in their procurement team. And it was whilst I was there that I got sponsored to study my Msips, and I started in 2009, I was awarded my Msips in 2011. Off the back of the role I had there, where I ended up in an associate director role, and also with my Msips, I got my first CPO role, which was at Roads and Maritime Services, which was part of Transport for New South Wales. And that was very exciting because New South Wales government was doing a huge piece to transform procurement to be more value adding. And working for Transport for New South Wales, we're one of the few government areas that had a lot of money to spend. So there's a lot of very interesting procurements. And whilst I was there, that's also then when I sort of took the step forward to obtain my FSIPS in 2017. Now the head of procurement at the ABC, and I very much feel that it's been my Msips and my subsequent FSIPS that has very much allowed me to get the more senior roles. In terms of what Msips has sort of meant to me and people I work with, I've been lucky during that time. CIPS put their faith in me and volunteered me to be their representative for the development of ISO 2400. So that was something, you know, I got to represent the Australian procurement community at developing a global standard for sustainable procurement. And that's something that's I've been very passionate about since. And I know I've got Tanya Harris, who was on that committee with me, as well as also on this call as a participant. So I call out to Tanya because she probably did a lot more work than I did. But it was very rewarding to see things like that coming through and becoming standards. I've also worked with the University of Sydney to help them develop a procurement curriculum as part of their the Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies. And it's been very rewarding to see a lot of those students who wanted to go and study and work in logistics and supply chain sort of discovering procurement, and a lot of them now work in procurement, and I'm being very sort of pleased to be able to stay in touch with them. So I think things like that have let me sort of give back to the profession. I've also been very heavily involved with CIPS on the New South Wales committee, and to me I think having MCIPS is about, I've been able to develop my own career and I've been able to get into roles that I can now influence the profession, and I can help that next generation who are coming up and help professionalise who we are. You know, very often we report in under finance, though I do firmly believe we're a supply chain function. And in finance, we have to have professional qualifications to do roles. So I'm very firm believer of championing that within procurement and getting that professionalism being brought into what we do.
Thank you, Sarah. Really colourful career history, and thank you so much for taking time out to share your experience with our audience today. Don't go far, because we're going to invite you back to be part of our panel Q&A at the end of this session. But before we do, Tod, welcome. Thanks for giving up your time. I know you're incredibly busy at the moment. So if you wouldn't mind just giving your career highlights for our audience. I know you have some interesting career-defining moments to share, and also really interested in the value of that professional certification, that Msips accreditation for you.
Yeah, career-defining moments, that doesn't sound good. So look, I've got a much more, I guess, eclectic career, which, you know, inadvertently was sort of centred around procurement. So if I go back and, you know, in sort of the dark days, you know, come sort of college, university, as I started off in the private sector, on the other side of the table. From there, I went into MFAS, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So I was one of the 3 members of the Contracts Management Unit there, and that was my, I guess, first introduction to procurement as it would become. That led to a posting overseas where I was the commercial attaché, and I guess my passion for, I guess, tendering and supplier relationship management, contract management really did come to the fore. From there, I mean, after leaving Foreign Affairs, I went into corrections in a more specialised sort of procurement capacity. But again, I was known as a BA there. And so that's the interesting evolution of the profession in New Zealand. So one of the things I ran there was the large PEX tender, which is the prisoner transporting. Also got the opportunity to do all the PPE gear. So I'm pretty hands-on. So anyone who was there at the time on the PPE project, I insisted that they all got tasered, that they all got pepper sprayed, and amongst some other bits and pieces that we trialled. So that's some good times, and also managing the kaitiaki agreements. So starting to get that exposure to procurement, starting to build up that experience. From there, I went down to New Zealand Post, where I was their senior ICT commercial manager under Andrea Morton, and most people in New Zealand will certainly know who Andrea is. From that opportunity, arose up at Land Information New Zealand to move up there as the head of facilities and procurement and really lead a significant transformation piece for them in terms of bringing procurement from a back office function to a sort of a heavily entrenched across the business sort of front office capability. So on the back of that, we won several awards, and that was great. That was a great opportunity, and that's where I really started to identify with CIPS as a I guess a global professional body that sort of recognised, and we're starting to see a bit more recognition for that profession in New Zealand. So, so I decided it was a good opportunity to get more involved, and certainly from a networking and getting an understanding from other procurement professionals who, of course, at the time didn't know they were procurement professionals too, to join the committee and network and engage. That led to becoming the Wellington the Wellington chair, and then eventually the regional chair. So from Lynn's and on the back of that exposure around CIPS, I think was instrumental in me getting my first sort of CPO, full C-suite leadership role in W Squares. That was a shared services model, and that's when I went through the MER route to get my Msips accreditation. So getting the Msips for me, in New Zealand at the time. It wasn't widely recognised as an accreditation, but I felt it was important, in terms of that sort of that self-esteem piece that I recognised myself for the hard work that I'd done over the years. I had championed and convinced a few other people to go down the Msips route, so it was time in my own life to do it as well. And Sarah's made an important point to me previously around the fact that it's really important as leaders in procurement, whether it's in Australia or New Zealand, that we do push and encourage, those credentials. Why would we leave that accreditation to lawyers, to accountants, to plumbers or builders? We are, so it is important that we lead by example, and we do show that being, that having those accreditations is critical. So, what avenues did that open up at that point? So then there was a bit of a tangent in my career at that point. So I joined as the procurement delegate authority on the board of Transparency International, and that opened up an opportunity to take a contract with an American space company. So again, it was a procurement relationship sort of role, quite transformational, very exciting, and what is the latest and greatest industry across the world now. So to be at the forefront of that was really exciting, and I attribute to my Msips, quite considerably to that. From there, I settled back down into a sort of a quieter life back into New Zealand and in the New Zealand Defence Force. So, after I attained my Msips about 12 months ago, I think I got the same time Sarah. I took on the role as Director of Commercial Strategy and Relationships at the New Zealand Defence Force, and again, a great opportunity and a good organisation to work with. That's got a lot of change coming up in terms of the way that they work and the way that they engage. So, procurement certainly is at the forefront of that for New Zealand Defence. So, yeah, so for me, it's been a great ride, and procurement, is a profession that I love. I enjoy the work. I still enjoy rolling the sleeves up and getting involved and supporting and demonstrating that leadership to others. That's probably it for me in a nutshell, really.
Thanks, Todd. That was really helpful.
Career
defining moment.
The whole time.
Oh, thank you to both our panel experts. So that really concludes what we have to share today. So audience, really over to you. We've certainly had a number of questions come through. So what I'll do is I'll do my best to filter through those and pitch them to the panel. But again, if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to submit those. So really the first question is around, what if my current role isn't a strategic level 1? I'll perhaps take that. If your current role isn't a strategic level 1, there's 2 possible options. If you do have 5 years experience in strategic level role, then you'd potentially be eligible, subject to meeting the wider experiential requirements. Equally, if you don't have 5 years experience at a strategic level at any point throughout your recent career, this probably isn't the pathway for you, but we do have a number of other different learning and development pathways through to Msips. I would say there's no easy way to Msips. The experiential pathway is really recognizing all of that hard work and effort you have already put in throughout your career. So you've got the war wounds, you've got the scars on your back through learning the hard way, if you like. The experiential pathway is really a way for you to showcase that and evidence that and have that assessed. If you're not eligible for that, because you don't have enough experience and you don't have that strategic level experience either, there are different pathways which will help you develop the competencies right the way up to that strategic level. And we can certainly work with you to identify the most useful one for you to suit your personal and professional aims and aspirations. So just going through to see what have we got. One for our panelists. I don't know, any comments really around the amount of time it might take to become accredited? And really, not sure. So yeah, how much time did it take to go through the pathway? Sorry, just translating the question. I don't know if Todd or Sarah want to reflect on kind of how long from, I guess, deciding that you're kind of feeling like you're going to go through it versus upon achieving your MCIPS, roughly how long that kind of took you?
Yeah, I'll start. I got assessed in late 2008 and started at the beginning of 2009. And I think I'd sort of set myself a target that I wanted to get through all my units in 2 years. But the method I was taking, I was able to sort of do some of that at my own pace. And I certainly know now you have a lot of the different the exam timings too. So I got through mine probably in about 1.5 years. So it was about 6 months quicker than I thought, but I really was pushing myself in terms of my own timings, in terms of what I wanted to achieve. So I think some of that will be self-driven if you're going through study routes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess from my perspective with the MER, so at the point in my life, I had 3 young kids. I had a Cpo Role. I was doing triathlon, so I had no time to study. There was really only one opportunity. So, I guess I had to roll the sleeves up and get, relearn a lot of the tools and techniques and the Porter's 5 forces and get all those models clear in my mind. So there was probably a good couple of weeks of sort of intensive study to make sure that I didn't fail. I certainly didn't take it for granted. And then from that, what happened with me is once I passed that stage, the technical questionnaire and obviously the application side of it, which is just taking time to put together, then it was just a case of taking the feedback from that and getting your head in the right space for the behavioural based interview. So, you can't really study for that. You just have to prepare yourself mentally for it. And so that's really just going back through your life, pulling examples. And, probably I would imagine I probably spent maybe a day getting myself in the right headspace for the interview. And you know, and that it went well. And I was lucky that I got the award straight after that, as opposed to having to do any papers. You know, but at least at that point, if I had to do papers, I knew it was only going to be 2 or 3 or 1, and I would have been able to fit that in around the bike and the swim and the kids, I'm sure.
Sure, thank you. And certainly a number of people that I've spoken to. The beauty of the experiential pathway is that you can kind of go through that at your own pace. So from application, you'll get your confirmation that you're accepted onto the program within 5 days. Once you're accepted, you move through to payment. You can then receive your competency assessment. Now you've got 30 days to do that online competency assessment. So if you do that on day 1, you move through, you book your interview. If you do it on day 30, it's obviously going to lengthen the total duration of your pathway. And then your interview is based on the availability and the times. So you'll book that. If you book a near one, you'll get through quicker. And if it's a bit further, you might have, I don't know, holiday or time out. So that can be a bit later. But on average, you know, you can go through in as little as 4 weeks. Equally, it can take longer depending on how you space that out and if there's any development plan towards the end. So we've had a couple of questions really just asking what happens if you're currently between jobs. I'll perhaps take that. If you're currently between jobs, that's not a problem. You can still submit your career history, highlight the fact that you are currently between jobs. Also, just really flag to perhaps previous line managers and get them engaged to provide you with your line manager testimonial. Okay, so we can certainly, if individuals are concerned, they can certainly contact us for more information about what to do there. Equally, we've been asked around if I'm in more of a portfolio career space, doing different perhaps consultancy jobs or short-term contracts, can I still apply? Yes, the answer is you can, absolutely. Just again, that will be reflected in your career history, and just think about who you want your line manager testimonials to be from. So, right, just going to scroll through the questions, see what else we've got there. It's a question about the development plan where there are gaps identified. So what types of tasks or initiatives could potentially be involved in the development plan? That will really depend on the gap that's identified. So that gap would come from the competency framework. For example, if it's a gap around negotiation, it might actually be to attend a negotiation training course. It wouldn't necessarily be a CIPS one, but it also states some learning outcomes to be achieved. And then you would submit your assessment to explain what you've learned, how you're going to do that differently, and that's what would be assessed. So it would very much depend on where your gaps are, but it's very much about that reflective learning process, which drives the assessment there. So, question here. My history has predominantly been in purchasing logistics roles, 4 years in procurement buyer also, and frontline hands-on. I've no formal training. I've purely learnt on the job. I'm wondering if I have enough background to attempt this certification. So from what you've said, it sounds like potentially you have. We would just work with you and show you where you can self-assess your level of competence against the competencies in the global standard to make sure that you do have that 5 years operating at a strategic level in procurement and supply. But on principle, that profile sounds like it's there or thereabouts. As ever, the devil really is in the detail. Oh, sorry, questions jumping around.
There's one I might answer why you look for one around NZDF and around the military supply chain skills, and whether that there's are you aware of any military veterans who have leveraged their experience for MSIPs through the MER process? So one of the great things about defence is there's a lot of investment and capability, certainly in the uniform side from a logistics perspective. But that doesn't seem to be relating into the civilian type capability that we would like. And it's something that I'd certainly like to change because, I mean, I look at our organisation here and I see the challenges that we've got, with senior uniform staff and what do they do next? And I think you're a CPO waiting to happen. you just need to formalise, your profession on the outside of your uniform. And so it is something that I think there is huge opportunity for military veterans to look at as a career opportunity when they're ready to hang up the uniform.
Charlotte, I can see we've had a question about the accredited master's programs as well. I don't know if that's something you wanted to speak a little bit more to, because it's certainly something I do direct a lot of people to the master's programs when they're thinking about doing one or the other, and I sort of say, well, why don't you do both?
Yeah, and that's actually a really good call. So while those that meet the eligibility criteria, i.e. have sufficient experience and operating at that strategic level role, are eligible to achieve their Msips through that pathway, there's nothing stopping you following a program, be it a master's program, be it short skills training programs or whatever, to continue developing your perspective really in procurement and supply management. That might be also your competence and really your scope. So absolutely. And as Sarah highlighted, we do actually accredit a number of master's programs, both with universities in Australia and New Zealand. And those are also accredited in many instances as pathways to Msips. So actually, if you believe that you want to go for a master's program, certainly look at those that are accredited, and that might be a worthwhile pathway for you to pursue to get your Msips. Equally, there's our own professional qualifications. If you're looking for capability development purely, then the experiential pathway isn't for you. It will develop capability where there are small gaps, but it's not going to fundamentally develop procurement and supply competence, knowledge, capability, and so on. So it's not really a learning pathway, but there are other pathways available if required.
I can see that a question's just come up. It was in the chat function. Someone's just put it into the Q&A about the recruitment process as well. I've recently been through some recruitment, and I specifically had the position descriptions written to say that Msips was preferable. I don't think we have enough maturity yet in the Australian market to make it mandatory, unfortunately, but certainly in my position descriptions for procurement roles in my team, it's preferable. And even if people don't have their Msips, I very much would like them to be starting to think about it, even just be affiliate members of CIPS, start going to a lot of events, etc., to start getting that exposure around the professional side of what we do.
Yeah, so just on that one as well, Sarah, so my role in defence was mandatory Msips minimum. So, but obviously at a senior level position. So there's a great example of, we're starting to see occasional roles pop up where it is not a desirable, it's an essential. There's also a number of questions around, no formal training. Now, I'm probably a classic walking billboard for that. So I've got no formal training in procurement. I'm going to annoy Siri. I fell into it like a lot of people, and I learned what I did on the job, picking up skills and refining those. A lot of the relationship side of who you are is what makes you a really successful procurement person, not necessarily the papers that you sat, although that gives you that technical grounding. But again, you pick up a lot of that. So not necessarily a showstopper if you don't have formal training. I don't even have a degree yet. I've been a CPO and I'm the head of commercial strategy, so never quite made it. Got sent overseas.
And Todd's comment to me then was, I always reprimand anyone who says they fell into procurement because I say procurement found you. I find that, on a serious note, I think you devalue the profession by saying you fell into it. So I think just that's some advice to people, maybe just select some of the words you might say when you're talking about why you work in procurement, because falling into it does make it sound as if it's not up there with other professions. Sorry, Todd.
Thank you. And I think that really speaks to how transferable the skill set is between sectors, but equally, if you've already become a fully fledged financial officer in one of your career pathways, there's nothing to stop you transferring into procurement or from engineering or from any other professional discipline, frankly. The skills are instantly deployable within the procurement and supply landscape.
But I think, Charlotte, on that too, people sometimes forget that we've got the indirect and the direct split, because people will look at me and say, what you do now has got nothing to do with what you studied. I'm like, yes, it does. I studied supply chain and logistics through manufacturing. It's just I work in an area now that is what a lot of people would think of as being indirect procurement, because most of our spend is property, technology, those sort of things, versus if you're working somewhere where you're physically producing something. But I think sort of thinking broader in terms of your skill sets in the background, even though the industry you're working in may not appear to be a supply chain industry, you are doing supply chain. And I think that's actually something that's been quite eye-opening to a lot of organisations, just with what's happening at the moment, that they've realised that, oh, I have a supply chain, I've never really thought about it, because we've had a lot of supply chain issues.
Yeah, great. I had a question about the weighting in the assessment over the competency assessment, the interview and the ethical certification. I suppose the best way to describe that is they are all essential. So the ethical certification, you have to achieve the ethical certificate in order to be accepted onto the experiential pathway, which really underlines how important ethical practice is to the profession. The competency assessment, so that online assessment, is really the starting point for the assessment. So there's no pass or fail for that online competency assessment. But what you do there is then those scores are taken forward into the competency-based interview with the assessor. They'll use your scores as an indicator. They won't be a definitive yes or no, and they'll start to unpack through your experience how you've used those competencies. So it's very much a practitioner-led assessment. So those online competency test scores are very much an indicator. They're not the deal breaker. It's very much a game of two halves from that regard with the two-phase assessment.
Something I just wanted to add on too, I probably meant to say it during my thing too. I mean, I think it's very rewarding if having your professional qualifications like Msips can get you to a point where you work at an organisation that what you are doing, you can really see how it's benefiting, you know, your customers. I mean, I'm very passionate about the social and sustainable. I love that I now work for an organisation that is something that resounds very much with our audiences about who we are. So I think that's an important thing too. You know, your career should be not just trying to get to CPO level. It should be trying to get, sorry, not everybody wants to get to CPO level. I'll take that back. But it should not just be about climbing the ladder. It should also be about going to an organisation whose values align to yours. And I think having your professional qualifications very much help you with being able to pick and choose like that. You're not just taking a job for the sake of it.
Yeah, and I think on that we've had an interesting question around, you know, the costs to achieve the MCIPS certification and not necessarily having the benefit of an employer who would sponsor that versus really, is there a return for the individual? I don't know if either of you would like to comment on that from your experience.
Well, I think I was lucky because my organisation did sponsor me. I do appreciate that's not the case all of the time. Certainly, I've had a mix for my actual membership fees. There was a question here too, Charlotte, about how long your MCIPS lasts for. You've got to be a paid up member. So I've had organisations that have paid my membership. I've had organisations that haven't. So a lot of it, you know, you will end up out of pocket most likely, because I doubt there'll be organisations that would fully cover you. But, you know, if they're serious about professionalising procurement where you work, they really should consider at least partially subsidising. I'd ask questions, what do they do in the finance area? Are they subsidising people who are doing chartered accountancies or renewing their CAs or CPA memberships? Ask those questions. What are they doing with their lawyers? Getting bar exams, things like that.
And I totally support that. I mean, obviously, I was lucky with my MSIPs that it was paid for by my employer, but you know, I fronted up for my FSIPs application costs and that as well. And again, you know, sometimes you just got to invest in yourself. And you know, we're lucky in a profession that's reasonably well paid in comparison to a lot of others. So, you know, it is something that, you know, I think sometimes you just got to take stock. You know, it is worth it, and you're worth it.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, the pay differential really from the research we've conducted also highlights that you potentially have higher earning capability through achieving professional certification, professional recognition. So, You might not see an immediate payback, but certainly through career earnings, you should hopefully be put on a trajectory that allows you to yield more through earnings, job satisfaction, and so on.
I'd also be cynical in an organisation that's not willing to invest in your development and procurement, or at least your accreditation. We're not talking a big investment. You know, are they ever going to take procurement seriously, a profession in the organisation? You know, is it just seen as a back office function, and you're going to be in a technical role for the rest of your life there? So, you know, that's another thing too. It's probably more of a sort of cynical response to it, but you know, you want to work in an organisation that truly values the importance that procurement is and can bring.
Sure. I'm going to ask each of you for really a final parting thought or comment before we really move to wrap this session. I know, Sarah, if you'd like to go.
Yeah, I have to apologise. Someone has decided to use some heavy equipment out on the street. So I apologise if you can't hear me. This is the joy from home when you're on video calls. The keen people may have also seen a cat run up the ladder earlier too. So, you know, I've ticked all of the video conferencing bingo. I guess for me, my final thing is procurement's a great profession. I mean, you know, I love working in it. It has so many, yes, there's another cat now video bombing as well, sorry. It has so many interesting things you can do, so many interesting categories, organisations. You are essentially being a business consultant across your organisation. Even at quite junior levels, you're getting exposure to a lot of strategy of your organisation, maybe at the local level, regional, global level, that a lot of your peers in finance roles, legal roles, other things aren't getting. So it's really, really interesting, and it's something that I think is never boring, and there's so much we can do to sort of add value to our organisations. So just keep persisting. A lot of you may have organisations who still aren't very mature or who aren't supportive. And I found that as I've changed areas, I'll go in somewhere that's quite advanced and it goes back and the maturity's lower again. But you know, we will get there. We've just got to keep, that's why some of us have just been badgering on about this for 10 plus years. I've been on a committee for a long time because I figure eventually we're going to start seeing the change coming through.
Yeah, and I guess from my perspective, you know, it's probably something that was on Gio's hoodie earlier. You know, the Nike, just do it. You know, don't procrastinate, get it done. You won't regret it. I mean, I've never regretted going through and getting my MCIPS. You know, and in fact, I enjoyed the process and the ability sort of to re-stimulate my mind a little bit, and sort of some of the technical side of things. So just do it. And it is Gio's birthday today, so we owe it to Gio to just do it. Told you I'd get that in.
Thank you.
Well done, Todd.
So thank you to both our panel experts for the benefit of your wisdom, your experience, and for sharing that with our audience today. Thank you too to our audience, and of course to both Gio, happy birthday, and Sophia, who have been supporting us from a technology perspective in the background. Before we close today's session, just to reiterate, we will follow up with all attendees. There's a post-webinar survey, so please do let us have your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up with information about where you can access the recording from today's session, and also how you can actually start on your next steps towards professionalisation. If we haven't got to answering your questions, please don't hesitate to contact us at the office. And what we will do is evaluate the questions that were submitted that we didn't get to answer, and we'll share those answers as part of the follow-up. I'll just draw your attention to the screen before you part. If you are considering joining CIPS or rejoining CIPS, there are some voucher codes available that you will put in at the payment gateway on the online registration page, which will mean that the $120 registration fee is waived. You will just pay the membership subscription. They're time limited. Hopefully they provide you a bit of a leg up in the first instance, and that offer is valid until the 30th of June. So thanks again. Really appreciate you joining us today and giving up time, and I really hope it was useful for you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.